So it's no secret that Republicans ran Oklahoma into the ground with their budgets, massive tax cuts for the rich, and of course for fossil fuel companies, especially for natural gas. Now, what happens when you do that? When you cut taxes for corporations and the wealthy? Well, that tends to leave gigantic holes in the budget. Now, that of course, when you do that, you actually have to plug the budget with money from other places. So those same Tea Party Republicans who decided to cut taxes on the rich and basically try to pull what they did in Kansas, well, what happens? What's the result? Well, between 2008 and 2015, Oklahoma slashed its per student education spending by 23.6%. That is more than any other state in the country. So they are at basically what I would call criminal levels of spending on education, which means they were not funding. Now, what happened to the schools? Well, some rural school districts were forced to adopt 4-day weeks, and qualified instructors who, of course, were very, very hard to find in those areas that couldn't afford them. Now, there are also school districts that, even though they had 5-day weeks and qualified instructors, they didn't have the kinds of books that they needed or school supplies. In fact, there were school books, history books, that were from the George W. Bush era. Wow. So, look, those conditions are absolutely intolerable. So now something interesting happened. It turns out that Republicans in the state decided to, and this is not Republican politicians, this is Republican voters. Republican voters, liberal voters that are in the state, got together and said, hey, wait a minute, we don't want you to cut education like this. In fact, there were polls that showed overwhelming public support for fixing this. Now, how would they fix this? Raising taxes on the rich and oil companies in order to put that money in investment or into education. So before, Republican voters put these Tea Parties in there, and what did the Tea Partiers do? They cut taxes on the rich and on oil companies. Now the voters were saying, actually, you know what? We want the opposite. Huh. Okay. Now, did that matter? No. Of course not. Mary Fallon, of course, was reelected in 2014 after receiving tons of money from oil and gas, while her GOP allies retained large majorities in both chambers of the legislature. So they were angry, the voters were, but they still voted for the same people. And of course, these politicians did the same thing. It was then that something did change. The teacher strike. Now, this started in West Virginia, right? And in West Virginia, the teachers actually did get a win, a significant win. Inspired by their counterparts in West Virginia, Oklahoma teachers decided, you know what, we're going to go on strike. And we're going to demand long overdue raises, more education funding for the students, and higher taxes on the wealthy and energy companies to pay for it. The same thing that they had been asking for before, except this time they weren't asking, they were demanding. Now, it did have an effect. I reported on this. They got Mary Fallon and the governor, and the local state house to be able to pass a little bit of a tax on fossil fuel companies. Now, that is despite the oil companies massively lobbying the politicians in order to prevent that. So big donors, of course, were like, okay, yeah, you know what? We still don't want that tax on us. We're going to try to pay you. And they're like, yeah, but the pressure from the people has gotten really, really intense. So we're going to have to do this. And it was a very, very tiny little tax. Now, look, the teachers were happy about it, but they decided, you know what? We're still not getting what we need. We got a little bit of an increase, and that's good, but it's not nearly enough. And now we know the politicians are not going to push for more. So instead of striking, which did work at first and was an effective tool, they decided to do something better. They ran for office. Now, what's the result of that? Now they say, oh, you can't run primaries against incumbents. Incumbents always win. That's why they're incumbents, man. They ran better. They ran better races. They ran better elections, and so don't try. Well, they tried, and the result is that the teachers actually routed the billionaire donors. 19 Republicans had voted against raising taxes to increase teacher pay. Only 4 will be on the ballot this November. They got crushed. As Tulsa World reports, Republican voters handed out more pink slips to House members Tuesday. 6 of 10 GOP incumbents involved in the runoffs were turned out, and a 7th narrowly survived. Wow. Not only that, but between the first round on June 26th and Tuesday's final results, a dozen incumbents, all Republicans, and all but one of them House members, lost primary or runoff races. What did I tell you? Primaries. You run primaries. In this case, this is all Republicans running primaries against other Republicans. But this time they're actually doing it on a platform of, let's fund education by taxing rich people and corporations. I love that. Now, not only that, but each of those defeated on Tuesday for a little extra special, I guess, icing on the cake. Each of those defeated on Tuesday had in some manner, earned the wrath of public education supporters during last spring's occupation of the state capitol. Now, that is, of course, during the protests in order to try and get more education funding. Now, let me give you an example of a couple of those who lost. Last spring, State Representative Jeff Coody told students in his district that their teachers' demands were, quote, akin to extortion. Now, what happened to Jeff Coody? Out. On Tuesday night, GOP voters returned Coody to the private sector. Get out of here. You're done. His colleague, Bobby Cleveland, scolded teachers for whining at the Capitol instead of teaching in their classrooms, was also voted out. Gone. And in May of 2017, State Representative Tess Teague had mocked the ignorance of protesters who were demanding tax hikes on fracking companies in a Snapchat video. Well, what happened to her? Well, Tess Teague, also out, but on the plus side, she does have a lot more time to learn how to use proper Snapchat filters. And of course, finally, Representative George Fott of Muskogee had won 5 terms in the state house, but was denied a 6th. He ran against a political neophyte who credited the teacher strike for inspiring his campaign. Again, all Republicans. He said, I walked with the teachers every day during the walkout. I worked to find what issues they faced. I think if you want to fix the issues, you have to talk to the people on the front lines. Look, man, primaries, man. And look, that's not the only change that has happened in Oklahoma. Last year, Democrats also won a series of special election upsets by speaking to popular outrage over disinvestment in education. Not only that, but Oklahoma, West Virginia, not the only place that this has had an impact. In Kentucky, a public school teacher defeated the state Republican House Majority Leader, Jonathan Snell, in a GOP primary. Snell had been considered a rising star in his party and a protege of Mitch McConnell. But he decided to spearhead a push to slash teachers' pensions. So Kentucky teachers expelled him from office. Again, it turns out that among Republicans, education kind of important, and not Republican politicians, of course, who take donor money from fossil fuel companies, but I'm talking about the voters. Voters said, you know what, that's enough. That's enough raiding our children's future. I actually care about education. And I want to fund education, and let's get the money from these giant corporations who are not paying enough taxes. There is hope, man, for Republican voters. There is hope. Not only that, there's more. In Wisconsin, Scott Walker is actually facing a really tough challenge of his tenure. Now, he's being challenged by the Democratic superintendent of the state schools. And the polls are not favorable towards him. Not only that, back in Oklahoma, Mary Fallin has a 19% approval rating. So if you have a strong Democrat that is running on, hey, let's invest back into our schools by taxing wealthy corporations, that's going to be a winning message. So here we have teachers and other people that actually care about education. It is important to Republican voters, and overwhelmingly, they prefer to pay for it with taxes on the rich and taxes on oil companies. And that is a win for education. That is a win for public workers. And it shows that even though we have a lot of differences in opinion, there are definitely things that we can work with the Republican voters on, and that is education. And it also shows that if you actually do primaries and you get involved and you vote, you might actually win. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.